The courtroom is packed. Rows of spectators whisper among themselves, their voices barely audible over the shuffling of papers and the occasional cough. Lawyers sit at their tables, some reviewing notes, others stealing glances at the woman standing confidently before the judge, Pam Bondi. The air is tense, charged with anticipation. This isn't just another case. It's a battle of legal minds, and everyone knows it. The opposing attorney smirks slightly, adjusting his tie as he stands, eager to strike first. "Your Honor," he begins, his voice carrying an air of certainty, "the facts of this case are clear. My client has been wronged, and the actions of opposing counsel have left us with no choice but to seek not only damages, but also sanctions for what we believe to be a blatant disregard for the law." He turns toward Pam Bondi, his smirk widening. The judge nods, glancing at her before shifting his attention back to the plaintiff's counsel. "Proceed." The attorney paces slowly, as if savoring the moment. "Miss Bondi has taken liberties that go beyond the scope of legal ethics. We have submitted documentation proving that her arguments rely on weak precedents and misleading interpretations of the law. Her tactics, while clever, have no place in this courtroom." He pauses, allowing his words to settle. The judge listens carefully, his face unreadable. The murmurs in the courtroom grow louder. People are already whispering about what might happen next. Pam Bondi stands still, her expression calm, her hands neatly folded before her. She does not flinch. She does not interrupt. She simply watches. The opposing attorney takes a dramatic breath. "Therefore, Your Honor, we request an immediate ruling against Miss Bondi, and given the nature of these actions, we further request that she be fined for attempting to mislead this court." The silence is deafening. The judge leans forward, his fingers interlocked. He studies Pam Bondi for a moment before exhaling sharply. "Miss Bondi, do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" She finally moves, tilting her head slightly, as if amused by the question. But still, she does not speak. "Not yet." The judge nods. "Very well." He picks up his gavel, tapping it once against the bench. "The court finds that counsel has failed to adhere to appropriate legal standards. As such, a fine will be imposed." Gasps ripple through the room. The opposing attorney's smirk grows into a full grin. He leans back, satisfied. This is the victory he expected. But Pam Bondi does not react. No shock, no anger, just the same steady gaze. She finally exhales, then lifts her chin slightly, and with a voice both measured and sharp, she utters her first words in this battle. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe you've just made a mistake." The entire courtroom freezes. Eyes dart between the judge and Pam Bondi, the tension rising. No one speaks. No one even breathes. And in that moment, the judge's expression shifts, just slightly. Something in Pam Bondi's tone tells him that whatever comes next is going to change everything. The judge's eyes narrow slightly, his fingers resting against the bench. The entire courtroom is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. Pam Bondi stands firm, her expression unwavering. The weight of her words lingers in the air. The opposing attorney chuckles under his breath, shaking his head. "A mistake, Miss Bondi?" he says, his voice dripping with mockery. "Perhaps you didn't hear the judge correctly." He gestures toward the bench. "The ruling has been made. You can't argue your way out of this." Pam Bondi finally moves, shifting her stance slightly. Her hands remain steady at her sides, her gaze locked on the judge. "I heard him perfectly," she says, her voice even. "And I'm well aware of courtroom procedure. But what I'm also aware of is that this fine, this entire ruling, is based on an incomplete understanding of the law." The murmurs in the courtroom begin again, growing louder. Some people nod, intrigued. Others shake their heads, convinced that Bondi is grasping at straws. The judge exhales, adjusting his glasses. "Miss Bondi, I do not take accusations of mistakes lightly," he says. "If you have something substantial to present, do so now. But I warn you, this court will not tolerate baseless challenges." Pam Bondi steps forward, her voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the opposing counsel has deliberately misrepresented my legal approach. The foundation of their argument is flawed, and as a result, so is your ruling." The judge leans back slightly, watching her. "Go on." The opposing attorney scoffs, but Bondi ignores him. She reaches into a thick binder on the table, pulling out a well-worn legal document. In the case of Richards versus State, precedent was set regarding the precise legal strategy I used. The ruling in that case was clear. It explicitly states that an argument structured in this manner is not only permissible, but well within ethical standards. She holds the document up for emphasis. Your Honor, the opposing counsel claims I twisted the law. That's not true. I followed it to the letter. The judge's expression tightens. He glances at the plaintiff's attorney, who suddenly seems less confident. Pam Bondi continues. Furthermore, the fine imposed on me assumes intentional misconduct. But had the court reviewed Richards versus State, a case that directly correlates to my argument, it would have been clear that my actions were completely legitimate. She steps closer to the bench, lowering her voice just slightly. Your Honor, I respectfully request that you re-examine your ruling, because if this fine stands, it sets a dangerous precedent, one that contradicts existing case law. Silence. The judge taps his pen against his desk, deep in thought. The weight of her argument is pressing down on the room. The opposing attorney finally speaks up, but this time, there's a crack in his confidence. Your Honor, this is an attempt to rewrite what has already been decided. The court made a ruling. We cannot allow last-minute theatrics to undermine that. Pam Bondi turns her gaze to him, her voice cutting through his objections. This isn't theatrics. This is the law. The tension thickens. The judge shifts in his chair, then reaches for the document in Bondi's hand. He skims it quickly, then more carefully, his eyes moving back and forth as he processes the information. Seconds pass, but they feel like minutes. The judge's fingers tighten around the paper. His expression darkens, not in anger, but in realization. Pam Bondi doesn't move. She doesn't need to. She knows what's happening. Then the judge exhales and looks up. His eyes meet hers. And in that moment, something shifts. This isn't just another legal battle. This is something else entirely. Something he didn't see coming. The judge remains silent, his fingers still gripping the document. His eyes scan the text again, slower this time, as if each word carries more weight than before. The courtroom watches, waiting, sensing the shift in the air. Pam Bondi doesn't move. She doesn't press him for a response. She doesn't need to. She knows the power of patience, of letting the truth sink in. The opposing attorney, however, is not so composed. He shifts uncomfortably, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Your Honor, he says, clearing his throat, if I may. The judge holds up a hand, cutting him off without looking away from the document. The opposing attorney immediately shuts his mouth, his jaw clenching. Pam Bondi watches the judge's reaction carefully. She sees it, the realization flickering in his eyes. The moment he understands that he may have ruled too quickly, that he may have overlooked something crucial. The judge finally exhales and sets the paper down. He looks at Pam Bondi, then at the opposing attorney. Counselor, he says, his voice measured, did you reference Richards versus State in your original arguments? The plaintiff's attorney blinks, caught off guard. Your Honor, I didn't see the relevance of that particular case. The judge's expression darkens. Didn't see the relevance? He leans forward, his voice firm. The case directly addresses the argument at hand, and you're telling me that in all your research, in all your preparation, you simply overlooked it? A few quiet murmurs ripple through the courtroom. A subtle shift in power is taking place, and everyone can feel it. Pam Bondi remains still, her face unreadable. But inside, she knows exactly what's happening. The opposing attorney clears his throat again, trying to recover. Your Honor, my case was built on the strongest available precedent. The judge cuts him off again. And yet it was incomplete. He picks up the document, holding it up slightly. Because this ruling, this fine, was based on your argument. An argument that ignored crucial case law. The attorney swallows hard, his confidence visibly cracking. Pam Bondi finally speaks. Your Honor, I would never question this court's authority, but I do question the foundation on which the ruling was made. She gestures toward the paper in the judge's hands. That case changes everything, and had it been properly considered from the beginning, I highly doubt we'd be having this discussion now. A heavy silence falls over the room. The judge drums his fingers against the bench, deep in thought. Pam Bondi watches as the realization fully takes hold. The fine was never justified. The ruling against her was based on a flawed argument, and now the judge knows it. He sets the paper down carefully, then leans back in his chair. His expression is unreadable, but his tone carries weight. "Miss Bondi," he says, his voice steady, "I believe you've made your point." The courtroom remains silent, waiting for what comes next. Pam Bondi doesn't flinch. She already knows what's coming. The judge's grip tightens on his gavel, his face unreadable. The courtroom is dead silent, every eye fixed on him. The weight of his next words will shift the entire course of the case, and everyone knows it. Pam Bondi remains still, her confidence unwavering. She has done her part. She has laid out the truth, and now it's only a matter of whether the court will acknowledge it. The opposing attorney, however, is visibly tense. His shoulders are rigid, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He knows what's coming, but he isn't ready to accept it. "Your Honor," he begins, his voice measured but slightly strained, "I must object. This is highly irregular. The ruling has been made, and while I respect my esteemed colleague's ability to argue, we cannot simply—" The judge raises his hand again, silencing him. His eyes, sharp and unwavering, lock onto the attorney. "You would do well to remember that this court values accuracy over rigidity," he says firmly. "A ruling that is incorrect is no ruling at all." The attorney exhales sharply, his frustration barely concealed. He glances toward Pam Bondi, but she doesn't return his look. She is still watching the judge, waiting for the moment of finality. The judge lifts the document once more, scanning the case law she cited. He flips through a few more pages, cross-referencing details with what was presented earlier. A frown creases his brow. Then after what feels like an eternity, he exhales. "Miss Bondi," he says at last, "you have successfully demonstrated that the ruling was made in error. The case you referenced does in fact provide a direct precedent, and had this been presented earlier, it would have changed the course of the proceedings." A wave of whispers spreads across the courtroom. Spectators lean in, exchanging murmured reactions. The shift in momentum is now undeniable. Pam Bondi remains composed, though there is a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "I appreciate the court's willingness to re-evaluate, Your Honor," she says smoothly. The opposing attorney grits his teeth. "Your Honor, if I may—" The judge doesn't even look at him this time. Instead, he raises the gavel slightly and speaks with finality. "The fine against Miss Bondi is hereby revoked. The court acknowledges the error and corrects the record accordingly." The gavel comes down with a sharp crack. The sound echoes through the courtroom, final and absolute. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Some shake their heads in disbelief, while others nod, recognizing what just happened. Pam Bondi stands firm. She does not celebrate, does not gloat. She simply nods once, as if this was the only outcome that ever made sense. The opposing attorney's face is tight, his jaw clenched. He knows he has lost, but more than that, he knows he underestimated her. The judge straightens in his chair, rubbing his temple. "Let this serve as a reminder," he says, his tone carrying weight, "that the law is not a game of who can speak the loudest, but who understands it best." His eyes flick to Pam Bondi, just for a second, before he looks down at his paperwork. Pam Bondi finally exhales, the tension leaving her shoulders. She turns, calmly gathering her files. Around her, people are still buzzing with energy, still processing what just happened. She doesn't need to say anything else. The case has spoken for itself. And as she steps away from the bench, one thought lingers in the minds of everyone in that room. Pam Bondi wasn't just another attorney today. She was something else entirely. Pam Bondi walks away from the bench with the same calm, measured steps she arrived with. The weight of the moment still lingers in the air, but she does not revel in it. She does not smile. She does not gloat. She simply does what she always does, moves forward with purpose. Behind her, the opposing attorney exhales sharply, rubbing his temples. The defeat is unmistakable. He doesn't dare speak, doesn't challenge the judge any further. He knows it would be pointless. The case law Bondi cited was irrefutable, and now the ruling has been reversed. But it isn't just the loss that stings. It's how easily he had dismissed her argument, how confident he had been in his own position, only to watch it unravel before him. The realization is dawning on him now, and it's clear from the way his shoulders sag just slightly. The courtroom buzzes with quiet murmurs. Spectators whisper among themselves, some still in shock, others nodding in admiration. Lawyers exchange knowing glances. This wasn't just a routine correction of a ruling. It was a moment that would be talked about for a long time. Pam Bondi reaches the defense table, gathering her notes with quiet efficiency. Her hands move with the precision of someone who has done this countless times, someone who is always thinking 5 steps ahead. One of her colleagues leans in slightly, his voice just above a whisper. "That was incredible," he says, shaking his head. "They never saw it coming." Pam Bondi doesn't look up, simply flipping a page in her notes. "They should have," she replies, her tone even. The judge stands from his bench, signaling the end of the proceedings. As he steps away, he pauses, just for a moment, and casts a glance back toward Bondi. There is no apology in his eyes. Judges don't apologize for mistakes. But there is something else. A quiet respect. A recognition that he almost let a mistake stand, and she didn't let him. She doesn't acknowledge the look. She doesn't need to. The ruling speaks for itself. As she collects her things, the opposing attorney finally speaks, his voice low and measured. "You really don't let anything slip past you, do you?" Pam Bondi finally looks up at him, her expression unreadable. "That's the job," she says simply. He exhales, shaking his head. "You know, I actually thought I had you," he admits, a bitter edge to his words. Pam Bondi tilts her head slightly, considering his statement. Then after a moment she replies, "You thought wrong." There is no malice in her voice, no arrogance, just a simple, undeniable truth. She closes her binder and straightens her posture. The case is over. The ruling has been corrected. Her work here is done. As she turns to leave, the room seems to part around her. Lawyers, clerks, spectators, some whispering, some watching in quiet awe, step aside. Because today Pam Bondi didn't just win. She reminded everyone in that courtroom exactly who she is and why she's one of the best. As Pam Bondi steps out of the courtroom, the cool air of the hallway greets her. The heavy wooden doors swing shut behind her, muffling the sounds of people still murmuring inside. She doesn't stop walking. She knows how this works. She knows that in the next few minutes, word will spread. Other attorneys and reporters lingering outside turn as she passes, their curiosity unmistakable. Some already know what happened. Others are just now hearing the details. But all of them recognize something. This wasn't just another day in court. A junior associate rushes to catch up with her, his steps quick and eager. "Miss Bondi," he says, his voice just slightly breathless. "That was one of the most surgical takedowns I've ever seen." Pam glances at him briefly. "It wasn't a takedown," she corrects. "It was a correction." The associate nods quickly, but there's admiration in his eyes. "Still, the way you just let him walk right into that, the way you didn't even flinch when the fine was first handed down, you knew all along, didn't you?" Pam stops. She turns to face him fully now. The hallway is still moving around them. Lawyers passing, clerks carrying stacks of documents, people caught up in their own cases. But here, in this small moment, the young associate waits for an answer. Pam studies him, then finally responds. "It's not about knowing all along," she says evenly. "It's about being prepared. It's about knowing that if someone tries to beat you with half the law, you bring the whole thing to the table." The associate nods again, processing her words. He's still young, still learning. And this moment right here, is a lesson he won't forget. As Pam turns to leave, a familiar voice stops her. "Bondi." She recognizes it immediately. A veteran attorney, someone who had underestimated her once before, someone who isn't likely to make that mistake again. She turns, her expression neutral. "Yes." He takes a slow step closer, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "I've been practicing law for a long time," he says, "and I've seen a lot of attorneys get blindsided in that courtroom, but not you." He pauses, then adds, "You let them make their mistake. Then you made them fix it." Pam doesn't break eye contact. "That's how it's supposed to work," she replies. The attorney exhales through his nose, a short, almost amused sound. You know, he says, crossing his arms, people talk about legal geniuses all the time. They throw the word around too easily. But today you didn't just argue the law. You owned it. Pam doesn't react, doesn't acknowledge the weight of his words. Instead, she simply adjusts the strap of her briefcase and says, "Then I did my job." She turns away, continuing down the corridor. Behind her, the attorney watches for a moment longer before shaking his head slightly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. He mutters almost to himself, "Yeah, you did." Pam Bondi keeps walking, her pace steady, her expression unchanged. But as she steps outside, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun, she knows one thing for certain. There are wins in the courtroom, and then there are moments that define careers. Today was one of those moments, and she never even had to raise her voice. Pam Bondi steps onto the courthouse steps, the sunlight casting long shadows behind her. The crisp air carries the distant hum of city life, cars passing, voices blending into a low murmur. But out here, just beyond the walls of the courtroom, the weight of what just happened still lingers. She adjusts her briefcase and takes a breath, steady and calm. There's no need for celebration, no need for fanfare. The law is not about winning or losing, it's about getting it right. And today, she ensured that happened. A few reporters waiting outside recognize her immediately. A microphone is lifted. "Miss Bondi, a quick word?" She could ignore them, could walk straight past and disappear into the city, leaving the moment to settle on its own. But instead, she stops. A journalist steps forward, notebook in hand. How does it feel to overturn a judge's ruling in real time? Pam doesn't react to the question the way they expect. No smirk, no triumphant grin. Instead, she tilts her head slightly, considering her words. "It's not about overturning a ruling," she says finally. "It's about ensuring justice is served correctly. The law exists to protect, to guide, to hold accountable. And if there's a mistake, it should be corrected." The reporter hesitates, expecting more. But there is nothing else to say. Pam has never been one for grandstanding. Another reporter speaks up. "Some people are calling this a masterclass in legal argument, that you exposed a critical flaw in the system today." Pam shakes her head slightly. "The system isn't flawless. That's why we have due process. That's why we challenge, why we appeal, why we fight when necessary. No one, judge, attorney, or otherwise, should be above scrutiny." The cameras flash. The reporters scribble notes. But Pam Bondi has already said what she came to say. Without another word, she turns and walks down the courthouse steps. As she moves through the crowd, she catches sight of someone standing at a distance. A young woman, no older than her early 20s, clutching a law textbook tightly to her chest. She isn't taking notes. She isn't holding a microphone. She's just watching. Their eyes meet, and in that single moment, Pam sees it. The spark, the recognition. The young woman doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. Pam Bondi gives a small nod. Just the faintest acknowledgement, and then she walks on. Because at the end of the day, it's never been about the headlines, never been about the spectacle. It's about knowing the law inside and out, about standing firm when others falter, about making sure that when the gavel comes down, it does so on the side of truth. And today, that's exactly what happened.